Welcome back to the FastAPI Beginners series, Lesson 4. So far, in Lessons 1 through 3, you've been building static endpoints that always return the same thing. Today, we make them dynamic with path parameters like items, ID, and query parameters like .searchCoffee. The big idea: every parameter is type-hinted, validated by FastAPI, and shows up in your docs automatically. Bad input bounces back as a 422. Your code never has to deal with it. Here's the roadmap. 4 mental models, each one building on the last. First, path parameters, those URL segments like the ID in items, ID. Second, query parameters, everything after the question mark. Third, the path and query, helpers that let you add constraints beyond just types, reusing the same field syntax we covered in Lesson 3. And fourth, we put it all together into the skip limit sort filter pattern, the shape every production list endpoint ends up following. Starting with path parameters. The pattern is dead simple. Curly braces in the root declare a capture, and a function argument with the same name receives it. Add a type hint like int, and FastAPI validates it for you. Items, 123, gives you $123 as a real integer, while items ABCE gets rejected with a 422 before your code ever runs. And it scales, stack multiple params like user ID and post IDD, each independently typed, no rejects, no manual parsing. Now anything after the question mark in a URL becomes a query parameter, and FastAPI's rule here is beautifully consistent. Any function argument that isn't part of the path is treated as a query param. Give it a default, and it's optional. Leave the default off, and it's required. Same type hint validation as before, so limit foo gets a 422, while al limit 20 chaos arrives as a real int. This is the pattern you'll reach for constantly. Optional queue, skip, limit, in stock. That's pagination and filtering, fully typed with 0 parsing code. But type hints alone only get you so far. ID, int will happily accept 0 or negative numbers, which aren't real IDs. That's where path and query earn their keep. They add value-level constraints right inside the signature using the same vocabulary you saw on field back in L03. GT, GG, lay, min length, max length, pattern. So items 0 now fails with a 422 because GT zeros is violated, and C keeks fails because it's shorter than 2 characters. The rules live with the parameter, not buried in the function body. Constraints handle ranges, but what about a fixed menu of choices? That's where literal and enum come in. Literal name, price, created at, says the sort param can only be one of those 3 strings. Anything else gets a 422, and the Swagger UI even renders it as a dropdown. Reach for literal when the values are short, inline, and local to one endpoint. When you need the same set across multiple routes, like an order status, promote it to a str enum so you get a named reusable type with descriptive members. Now let's put it all together. Every list endpoint in production tends to converge on this exact shape. Pagination via skip and limit with a hard cap at 100, sort as a literal, an optional search query with a minimum length, and a handful of typed filters. Notice how everything optional has a sensible default. Every numeric field is bounded, and the function signature itself becomes the contract. Swagger renders the form, validation rejects bad input, and your handler just calls the database. This is the pattern that scales from a toy project to 10 million rows. Before we move on, internalize these 6 reflexes. They're the muscle memory that separates tutorial code from production code. Use path with GT0 on any positive ID. Cap your limit at 100. Reject negative skip values. Lock sort options behind a literal, drop a description on every path and query so the front-end team can read your docs instead of pinging you, and when your URL hits 4 levels deep, flatten it into query params. Each one is a single line of code that saves you hours of debugging or a 3 a.m. incident later. Here's your daily reference. 12 patterns covering everything we've touched in this lesson. Path placeholders, type validation, optional and required queries on the left, numeric bounds, literals, and the V2 annotated syntax in the middle. Reusable enums, min length, and aliasing for renaming params in the URL on the right. Screenshot this one. It's the muscle memory for every endpoint you'll write going forward. Now the failure modes. 5 things that pass review from a junior but get flagged instantly by a senior. An unbounded limit param will eventually take down your database. An untyped ID accepts negatives and 0, leading to ghost queries. Route order matters because FastAPI matches top to bottom, so docs users me has to come before users are ID. A stringly typed sort opens the door to injection. Use literal or enum. And never accept the same field from both path and body, or you'll ship inconsistent updates. Each one is a single line of code away from being correct. Time to put it into practice. 3 exercises, each one a beat we just covered. First, a path param with a GTR 0 constraint, hit it with a valid ID, a 0, and a string, and watch the 422s come back with field-level detail. Second, the canonical list endpoint, skip, limit, queue, and in stock. Memorize this shape, you'll write it constantly. Third, lockdown sort with a literal and status with an enum, then open docs and watch the drop-downs generate themselves. And that's lesson 4 in the bag. Your URLs are now meaningful, typed, constrained, and self-documenting, which is the whole point. Tomorrow, we go from reading data to changing it. Full CRUD with post, put, and delete, request bodies, proper status codes, HTTP exception, and the 4-verb shape every senior backend writes on autopilot. See you in lesson 5.